Hi, good afternoon. I am Nicole Havelka, and I am your mindful change coach, and I am empowering you and your organization to prevent and to recover from burnout. And I am so excited to be doing this Defy the Trend live today. Grab a beverage, grab a snack, lunch if you're eating late lunch, or if you're in a different time zone and are settling in. And get comfortable while I talked to my friend, Reverend Nicole Pickens. So there's two Nicoles. Sorry about the confusion. Two Nicoles on this call, but we promise we won't make it too weird. So I'm excited to welcome Nicole. Nicole is a local church pastor. She is a graphic designer, a copy editor, and an all-around terrific human, and also happens to be one of the founding members of the Defy the Trend community. And I am delighted that she is here to talk with us a little bit about how mindfulness can help be a tool for working with clinical anxiety. Just one little note. So one little note is that I am definitely not a therapist or a psychiatrist. So what I do, and we'll say more about this when we get into it, what I do is help be part of the team and support that. So I'll invite Nicole a little later, say like, what are the other kinds of support that you have in addition to the support that you have from our community and our practices. But I want, just for those of you who may have this experience with anxiety and things like that, just to know that I am not in any way trying to replace those other treatments, simply to be a support to that. That was the thing I almost forgot. So good, I remembered. So I'm going to let Nicole introduce herself, and we have a few questions, and we'll probably be here for 15 or 20 minutes having a chat. And I'm excited to see if you have any questions that come up, folks who are watching, put those in the chat. I can see that. If you're on Facebook, there is a little special thing you have to do to log into StreamYard and in order to ask a question in the chat, and for me to see it, I should say. So just so you know, there is instructions in there for that. And now for reals, I'm going to let Nicole introduce herself and we'll get started with our chat.
Yeah. Thanks so much for inviting me to join in this conversation. As you said, I'm a local church pastor. I've been pastoring for about 5 years now. Currently, I pastor some small churches in Northwest Pennsylvania in the United Church of Christ, and also do some freelance graphic design and editing and writing work, things like that. I consider myself a social justice advocate, a dreamer. I love creative pursuits and stories. And a lot of these things contribute to my asking a lot of questions and to being kind of a sensitive person. If you're, feel like you're a Myers-Briggs person, I'm an INFP. Enneagram 4. So if you're familiar with those personality inventories, that kind of gives you a clue that, yeah, I'm one of those folks that's a little more predisposed to being anxious.
Well, that's a great segue, Nicole, that you mentioned that. So tell us a little bit about your experience of anxiety. And even we talked a little bit this before we logged in here. What is anxiety in the clinical sense versus maybe the more casual way that people would throw that word anxiety around as a substitution for worry, let's say, in our just regular language, right?
Yeah. So we all experience anxiety. All experience this sense of being maybe feeling like keyed up or tense when we're thinking about something that we're not sure about, that's unfamiliar, something, it can be like worry. For some of us, including myself, there's another kind of level of anxiety. I have, for a little more than a decade now, have been diagnosed with generalized anxiety disorder, which means that I kind of have a buzz of anxiety that's just there. Even when there's nothing I'm specifically worried about, it's just kind of like, like if you've got a staticky broadcast signal, like on your TV or radio or something, just this hiss and fuzz. It's just kind of there. At least that's how I experience it. And other people who deal with anxiety, may experience it in different ways. That's how I experience it. It's just it's something that's there. Maybe it's just how my brain's wired, but it's a part of who I am, part of what of what I deal with when I encounter the world.
Well, thank you for being willing to share that. I appreciate that a lot. And another note is that Nicole and I have talked about this in advance, and Nicole Pickens is willing to share these things publicly. I wouldn't share these things without her permission. So just so you know that, as a coach, I don't share people's personal business. This was something that we talked about in advance. So
and I really appreciate that. And also, I'm glad to be an advocate for those of us who deal with anxiety and other mental health challenges.
Yeah, it's an important conversation to have, because even though I feel like that's breaking open right now. Like there's more and more openness about mental health issues. I think there's still a lot of confusion about what that experience, especially that lived experience, if it's not your own, right?
Yeah.
Mostly fueled by the fact that we aren't willing to talk about it most of the time, right? We're not willing to share. If there's some stigma to having that, and I'm glad to have this conversation so that we can break some of that, break that apart, and actually begin to help people with it, right? Because if we don't talk about it, we're not going to do anything about it, right?
Yeah.
I want everybody who's in the community and beyond, for that matter, to live out their full selves and use everything that they've been given in the world. So I really want to do that with Nicole and everybody else. That's really important to me as well. So there were a lot. So you had some pretty stressful circumstances that, well, predated and sort of post-dated initially your kind of coming to and finding the Defy the Trend community, which I don't think even had that name yet when you started. So Nicole was really there at the beginning. So just so you know that Nicole was super there at the beginning, and for that I'll be eternally grateful, and has been so much help. And is just a pleasant face to have on Zoom and in other times in general. So but tell us a little bit about the circumstances you came to, as much as you're willing to share about that, because they were pretty stressful. The time you were finding yourself in, and then to some degree it continued, right? Because we stumbled our way into COVID at that. So so say more about that, Nicole. What brought you to the community?
Yeah. So I first connected with the community in 2020, maybe a month or two into the pandemic, I think. And at that time, I was, before the pandemic started, I was in a stressful work situation personally. And they're just having some friction between different personalities. And it was coming to a point that it was time for something new, which is always a challenge, realizing that that's where you are. I was also, my husband who's also a pastor, was coming to the conclusion of his ministry in a particular setting. Where he had been serving could no longer afford to keep him, and as a United Methodist, his bishop said, well, there's another place that can't afford you that we want you to go. So the bishop had the power to appoint him to go elsewhere. So we knew that change was coming, and then had the pandemic layered on top of that. It was a lot. We were learning a lot of new things. Neither of us knew the first thing about video editing or live streaming, and so we learned those things very quickly. Our lives were changing at a very rapid pace. We were experiencing the same stress that everybody else was, not knowing what was going on in the world. And about that time, I was looking for anything I could to help me to find some moments of calm and to help me. Part of my job as a pastor, one of the ways we describe that role is being a non-anxious presence. And that's really hard when you have anxiety in general. and, and then when the whole world is anxious for good reason on top of that, I was searching for something that helped, and that's when I stumbled across what was evolving into the Defy the Trend community, and I was so grateful that I did because it's been transformational for me.
Well, yeah, well, say more about that. So you said earlier that you had a diagnosis of generalized anxiety disorder for a number of years before that. So that was a new thing for you to deal with, but now you have this really heightened situation, right? Where there's that general, that sort of in the world, lots of anxiety and worry, right? For good, again, like you said, in COVID, for good reason. And you were also dealing with, as many of us were, still dealing with normal change, right? Like still dealing with how things were going in general. So say more about how then did our coaching community, that again was evolving, it was really just beginning and evolving at that point. How did the community, and particularly the thing that I'm trying to put more of in the world, is how do we use mindfulness to support ourselves through these times of change? And when I started in 2019, it never occurred to me that we would be stumbling through the times that we're finding ourselves in. So, but it also makes me feel like, oh, this is a really needed thing. And so one of the things that I bring together is leadership development coaching alongside using mindfulness and meditation practices. But not only that, but generally encouraging people to do a good job of taking care of themselves. And that helps all the things, I think, like in terms of anxiety and whatnot. So, so say more about how mindfulness and, again, our evolving community has supported you.
Yeah. Well, mindfulness for me, the first thing it does for me is helps me to take stock and really notice what's going on inside me, what's going on in my body, in my mind, how, to borrow a phrase from my husband's Methodist tradition, how is it with my soul? To really take stock and to be able to pay attention to what do I need in this moment. That alone, just having that awareness really helps, because it helps me to figure out, are there other things I need to do? Do I need to talk with my healthcare provider about adjusting some of the other kinds of support I have? I have long worked with folks on working with medication, working with counseling, but my providers in those areas are always encouraging me to look at things like mindfulness to help support dealing with anxiety. So taking stock is that first step. Then one of the things that I've especially discovered working with you, Nicole, is how powerful it can be at times if I'm feeling anxious, if I'm feeling keyed up. Sometimes I need to do something to release that, to expend a little, raise my energy level a bit. And it's without being mindful about it, I could just amplify and keep spiraling into greater anxiety. But by doing that mindfully, I'm able to utilize that energy in a good way, in a healthy way. And then I'm better able to relax and to lean into calm and the kind of peace that I need for balance. So the specifically the Defy the Trend community and coaching with Nicole, it's really powerful because for one thing, I'm not doing this all on my own, because I'll just be upfront. I'm not organized enough and disciplined enough to just do this on my own. I mean, I've done enough reading over the years that I could figure out, yeah, these are good ideas. These are good things that I should be doing, but I need a community to help me. I need a coach. I need mentors and people like that in my life to help me to stay on track. And so the Defy the Trend community has been a big part of that for me in helping me to be aware of what I need and to reach out for that energizing and that calm that is out there for me to tap into and to realize is also within myself.
Yeah, yeah, I love hearing that, and I will say personally that um, one of the wonderful things about working with Nicole is your willingness to try things.
Mm.
So even when I've said, okay, so here's an idea I have about a practice that might be useful for you, knowing that you um, have clinical anxiety, maybe even on top of the natural anxieties and worries that are happening right now. What if we try this thing? And even trying things that seem counterintuitive, like that seem like this doesn't seem like it would help, but but because of my yoga training and from working with other people as well, they're like, okay, and of course I'm always telling people to adapt it and make it work for them in the way that works best for them too. That's really important to me. But I think one of the key things that Nicole has done is really been adventurous and saying, okay, well, let's try it. Like, and in general, what's the worst can happen? Like, it just doesn't work, or there are a few practice so one of the and I'll just say a little more about this then, so I can explain it to folks. One of the counterintuitive things, like, because, and people with higher than normal anxiety levels, like, will really want to calm down, right? Like, and so you would think that calming and grounding practices would be helpful for that, and they can be, but often what is better first are stimulating practices. And I think that, Nicole, you can say more about what this feels like in your body. Maybe that's another good conversation to have next. But it's actually like bringing your energy up in order to calm down. And this can be true, I think, it's actually true for a lot of us because we're mostly overstimulated. Like, even if because of screens, because of our really busy lives, we tend to be overstimulated. And then if you add a layer of anxiety on top of that, I think that's a really interesting thing, or it's a really challenging thing. So tell me a little bit about your experience of trying those counterintuitive practices, right? That I'm like, hey, this may or may not work. Will you try this with me? Right?
Yeah. Well, the one thing about that I have really noticed makes a difference is knowing that up front you always say it's an invitation, not an expectation. I can try it, and if it doesn't work, I can stop. I can shift gears. And I know there's going to be no shaming about that. There's, that it's just really embrace it as an experiment. And I had hit the point that I tried so many things over the years that I learned to, okay, it's especially when I hit that point where we're in a pandemic and there's all this going on, I knew I had to open myself up. The other thing about that, the thing that made that really feasible is knowing that I was working with a coach and with a community that are supportive, and knowing that I'm with folks I can be vulnerable. I mean, even that sense of, there's a little bit of sense, even, when we're doing, say, yoga practice, and I've got my camera and my microphone turned off, there's a vulnerability in connecting with the community. And I always feel so supported within our community that's what enables me to try something new, to engage in an experiment and discover, oh yeah, this thing that I wouldn't have thought of on my own really helps, and really helps me to be more focused, be more calm, to be more connected with myself.
And so what you had mentioned earlier, that you really felt like these things were transformative. Can you say a little bit more about the specifics of how has that supported and transformed you? How has that enabled you to live life differently or do your work differently? what has happened kind of because of
Mm,
that?
yeah. Well, as I have worked through, this time of professional transition, initially we moved for my husband's new church role, and then I went through a period of I did a couple of interim roles before a year ago, starting a new settled ministry myself. Um, Throughout all that period of change and discernment, it helped so much to have practices that would help me acknowledge what I was feeling, address when I was feeling something that was blocking me from engaging in the work that I needed to be, and to just really breathe into the moment, to be fully in the moment. That let me do the discernment work that I needed to figure out where's God calling me, what is next for me. It let me embrace the opportunities and also face the challenges with a sense of being really present, being feeling able and ready to address those challenges in a healthy way, in a way that felt like it honored who I am called to be, and also honors those I'm interacting with. And without mindfulness practice, that would have been a lot harder. And none of us needs life to be harder.
Right. Well, and I like really what you were saying about like being able to breathe through
Mm,
and pause and be present to the moment, because I think that's what a lot of us try to do, anxious or not, right?
mm-hmm,
Is avoid unpleasantness, avoid
mm-hmm,
what might be hard, or it may not even, like sometimes we also make these things up in our heads, right?
mm,
Like, oh, this is going to be like so much worse than I thought it was going to be, or I made it in my
yeah,
head to be a bigger thing than it turns out to be. And if we're present, we can search for that. But
mm-hmm,
the other mention you had is of pausing and discerning so that you can figure out the best way forward
yeah,
as well. And that really only comes, I think, from taking that time for yourself.
mm,
And there can be formal, like you're talking about, kind of a formal gap between like employment or something like that, or
mm,
between school and a job or whatever the thing case might be. But I think we can take those little gaps for ourselves all the time. And
absolutely. And
that's,
for me,
yeah,
yeah, it is really both, because it was between those gaps between different professional roles, but also, for example, earlier today I was getting my hair done, and uh, the beautician had to walk away for a little bit, and she asked me, uh, "Oh, while I go tend to this other thing, do you want me to grab your phone where it's sitting out of reach?" And I said, "No, you know what? This is a good moment for some mindfulness practice." And I've learned to fit those in these, even in the oddest, stopped at a red light to do some breathing exercises and calm
yeah.
myself in the midst of traffic. you know, uh, those little moments, as well as the more intentional regular practice, they make life so much richer for me, and keep me from spiraling into those anxiety cycles that are always going to threaten if I'm not paying attention.
Hmm.
It really
Oh,
keeps me
for
on track.
sure. Right, right. And I love their I was doing definitely a happy dance, in it, not as much visually because I want people to be able to see me right now, but a happy dance when someone who's been working with me for a while says, "Oh, I've learned to do this when I'm in traffic. I've learned to do this when I'm in an everyday situation," because that's really the point, in some ways, the point of being on the mat
Mm,
is that we practice the things that we're going to need in real life. It's not, about, I mean, it's great to have these moments of respite and calm during, like, say, a yoga class or whatever else you're doing that helps you stay calm, but it really isn't useful, right? It's not as useful as it could be until you're taking the leap and saying, "Oh, this cool thing you taught me here is something I'm using here now."
mm,
And I know that I had that. I'm glad that you're learning that sooner than I did, because it took me a lot of years to practice before I was like, oh, I'm in a stressful situation. I'm going to pause my breathing and enter back into it. And I know that every time that I've done it since then, which is many times, like I'm a different person coming into that. Not in dramatically in terms of personality, but I'm a much calmer, like you were saying, calmer, more focused, maybe less frustrated, angry, whatever the big emotion might be. Not that we're trying to get rid of big emotions, by the way, but if you're trying to be in relationship with people, you know, in order to be open to where they are, it means that sometimes, like, they're going to be more open if you're more calm. Like that's the reality. If you're dealing with I'm thinking the situation I'm thinking of was a really difficult interaction with my mother at the time. This was many years ago. We were having one of many heated discussions when I did that. That's one of the first times I remember doing it anyway, in a really stressful situation. It's really powerful experience. But we can have it just when but I've also done it lots of times, like just siphoning off stress when you're stuck in traffic and you're late for something, like when you're more mundane day-to-day interactions like that. I think that's really when the practice matters. And it's, I another thing that I tend to preach a lot about in terms of yoga and meditation and mindfulness is that it's not even necessarily about just about stress reduction and calming and working with anxiety, though it is those things. It's about liberating ourselves. It's about liberating us from the expectations that people have from that the world and the world and other people have for us, and living our fullest, truest, most authentic selves. And it's about shining ourselves up in a sense, really letting the good, the heart light of ourselves, that light of our heart to really shine in day-to-day interactions. And if we're feeling yucky of any sort, whether it's anxious or whatever, like that's not going to shine. We tend to protect and hide ourselves in those cases.
Yeah. It's making me think of in terms of mindfulness lets me remember I have emotions. Emotions don't hate me. Anxiety is a part of my life, but anxiety is not who I am. And those things don't have to control me and control every aspect of how I interact with people. And I have more volition in all of this than sometimes those lies of anxiety might lead me to believe.
And I mean, that's a perfect example of liberation right there. Like to liberate yourself and to be able to separate out that I may have anxiety, but like that doesn't define who I am in the world, right? This may be a part of it, may be a part of my lived experience, but it doesn't have to be like my primary identifier, right? It doesn't have to be that. Not that you have to be secret about it. Let's be clear. We started there, right? We started our conversation with saying we're not interested in keeping these things secret. Anyway, Nicole and I have long conversations like this all the time. So I want to honor people's time, and we could go on probably for hours. But I would love to wrap up maybe with Nicole. Any advice or any thoughts that you might have for others that have anxiety, either the clinical sense or maybe are in really stressful circumstances for one reason or another. Any advice that you might have for them if they have any questions about or reticence about trying mindfulness in helping them through
that? I certainly understand that. When you're anxious already, trying something new is very intimidating. I encourage folks to try it out, especially in a supportive context like the Defy the Trend community. It is so powerful to help in centering you and helping you to really connect with all that you are, all of your potential, and to find that peace that I think we all at various times are searching for. it's just amazing what can happen when you open yourself up to it, especially in a supportive context, like working with you, Nicole, like with being a part of the Defy the Trend community.
Yeah. Well, I want to thank you for taking time out of what I'm sure is a busy day to chat with me and talk about these really important things, and like you've done over and over, sharing your time with me and with the rest of the community as well. So I'm
You're
grateful
very
for you
welcome.
and
Yeah.
your time. And a mention, thanks to Nicole, who mentioned so many times the Defy the Trend community. We are open for new members right now through Friday. That's April 21st. And you can find that at defythetrend.com/community. And those community memberships, there's a free one that you can join actually any time of year. And then there are two reasonably priced. I try to make these things very accessible to people because it's important to keep the teachings accessible. You can access those. You get access to an online community, yoga classes every single week, plus some extra restorative practices quarterly, group coaching, and some calendar planning things that we do, all kinds of things that both help you learn how to do the practices like we've just been talking a lot about and make time for them, like helping you carve out, what does it look like for you to carve out 2 hours a week for yourself? What are 2 hours a week that you can do for yourself, and what can you do for yourself? So again, thank you so much, Nicole, for joining me. I'm so grateful for you for today and for all the things. So I'll see you later. Bye, friends. I hope to see you again on the Defy the Trend Live. I'll be back. I promise. I'm having a lot of fun with these, so I'll be back. Have a great rest of your afternoon and evening.